Officially, good morning to our Ask a Consultant series. I am Susie Lee. I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Learning at Forefront. I've been on the team for about 9 years. We've done a lot of different things over the years. And during the pandemic, we started the Ask a Consultant series to respond to the chaos of that moment. Um, Folks had so many questions about so many different topics, and we were scrambling to find and provide information as quickly as possible to our members and our community. And so we teamed up with ACN. And um, after some time, obviously the pressing issues of the pandemic changed. And so the Ask a Consultant series kind of faded out a little bit over time. But now we are in a completely different moment of chaos for the sector. Folks that are impacted by federal actions, the economy generally, putting extra pressure on both our donors and our staff, generally, just sort of the state of the world at the moment. So it really seemed like a prime time to bring Ask a Consultant back. I'm really excited. We're looking forward to having this as a quarterly program. So if you have ideas about topics, feel free to post those in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tweed to share a little bit more about ACN.
Excellent. Thank you, Susie. Greatly appreciate the opportunity. My name is Tweet Thornton, and I am the board president for the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits. We're very excited that this series has been renewed. There certainly are no lack of challenges for anyone in our sector, and this is a very exciting time to get things started. So, for anyone not familiar with ACN, we were founded in Chicago in the 1980s. Through that, ACN has grown to a national network of professionals dedicated to strengthening the social impact sector. Today, we have more than 140 consultant members and advisors. Members are in Illinois and 17 additional states. Because of our Chicago roots, we have a solid and very strong contingent here in Chicago. Our expertise among our members spans over 30 plus practice areas. We serve nonprofits, foundations, associations, and other mission-driven organizations. We are a trusted partner to nonprofits, foundations, and including Forefront. Overall, we're a professional community built around learning, relationships, and service. Some of those expertise, I'm not going to read all of these, but the highlights are strategy and organizational development, communications and marketing, fundraising and growth. But wait, there's more. Leadership and governance, programs and impact, people, operations, and technology. When it comes down to it, if you're a nonprofit and you are looking for expertise guidance from a consultant, ACN is a great place to start your journey with that. If you visit our website, there's a member directory that you can search and look for a variety of consultants there. We will get more into that and share that link as this conversation moves along. Today for our panel, we have Daniel Ash with the Field Foundation, Susie Lee, who greeted us and is going to serve as our moderator, myself, and Amy Wishnick, who, in addition to being a board member for the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits, is a past president of ACN. So, Amy, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about, why you're a member of ACN, your connection to the organization, and perhaps even a little bit about what made you step up, both as past president, and then also to join the board again. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about your experience with ACN.
Great, thank you. I'm really actually particularly delighted to be here today with everyone because I actually did one of the Ask a Consultant programs during the pandemic, and it was particularly rewarding, I think, for all of us to be together as we all kind of adjusted to virtual life. And so that was really nice. So I've been a consultant for 22 years, and I actually knew about ACN before I started consulting because a friend of mine had been one of the founders. And I think I'd even gone to a program before I was consulting. I was doing executive search before consulting. So I knew, frankly, at the get-go, I was going to join ACN because this was going to become a community of colleagues for me. And it is that and more. It is a place where I have deep friendships. I have consultants I can rely on to partner with, to bring in on projects with me, to call up and say, "Have you ever experienced this before? Do you have any advice for me?" And so, it's just been really, really a very meaningful part of my professional life. And so when I stepped up to join the board, it was 2009. I'd been consulting at that point for about 5 years. And I thought, what would be a good thing to do that would give back. I also I'm a believer in that you get out of an organization what you put into it. And so if I put myself into it and did things that I would reap the benefits, and that has come back manifold. So I did that. And then being president was actually kind of great. We had, we had a relationship with Forefront then, and I'm actually also a Forefront member. And so, this partnership I think is really rich and offers a great opportunity for both organizations. So that's just really a very positive thing. Why did I step up to the board again? Um, I get it's a funny thing now that I think about it. I seem to do things twice. I was the first person who was president twice of my kids' preschool long ago. I just completed another sort of 10-year stint of being on the board and the executive committee of our synagogue. And so here I am again on ACN's board because it was a time when I joined the board that ACN was going through some change, and I felt very strongly about the direction we wanted ACN to go. And if you feel strongly about something, you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is. And so here I am.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. And just a
Mhm.
personal thank you as I've gone through my own journey being here as ACN board president. Amy, you've been a great mentor and a great friend. And appreciate you overall, and especially thanks for
Yes.
joining us today.
Thank you. That's very sweet. And I have enjoyed all of what we do together too.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. And when I was thinking about this conversation and this great invitation from Susie to have ACN restart the Ask a Consultant series, one of the first people that came to mind to join this conversation was Daniel. Daniel Ash with the Field Foundation is someone that I've known for quite some time. And one of the first documents that I came across when I was president and looking at some of the archives was a conversation that ACN had with nonprofit leaders going back a while. And there was Daniel's name. And Daniel and I, like I said, we've known each other for quite some time, but I didn't know that he had been an advocate for ACN. So I reached out to him. We had a great conversation about the role of consultants with the social impact sector. So I'm thrilled that Daniel, that you're here today and joining the conversation. And if you just want to talk a little bit about some of those thoughts and how you as a foundation leader see the role of consultants in the impact sector.
Thank you, Tweed, and thank you for the invitation to sort of be with you all today. And I actually remember that conversation that you're referencing from many, many years ago. So let me just start off by giving everyone here some context about my career, my journey. I've worked exclusively in the nonprofit space from the time I graduated from the University of Chicago. So my entire career has been in this sector, and for the vast majority of my career, I was not in the foundation space, but I was working for small nonprofits, doing really important work here in our city, here in Chicago. Um, as you all know, like, most of these small nonprofits, even back then, were always under-resourced, and unable to sort of like truly build the internal capacity and we needed to actually deliver on our missions. And so, from a very early stage in my professional career, I was in a position of relying on consultants to get things done. Um, and my approach developed over time my approach to actually engaging consultants developed over time. And I realized that as a leader, I wanted to have deep, deep relationships, even with my consultants. So when I was at, give you an example, at WBEZ, and I led all the fundraising at WBZ for 10 years. I engaged our consultants very closely and even had our consultants join staff meetings on a regular basis because I wanted to create the conditions where the line between staff and consultant was very thin and that the relationships were really strong. Um, and so as I approached advanced in my career, I really maintained that approach, like deep, deep relationships. So that the consulting network that I engage now is very similar to the one I engaged when I was at WBZ or the Shriver Center. To give you an example, we're here at the Field Foundation. We've just launched a new website, and I used the designer that I met many, many years ago when I was at BZ. So I say to say that relationships matter to me, and I think as a nonprofit leader, it's important that we don't see consultants as a transactional sort of modality, but as a deep relationship mode that um, allows you to do the work and do the work more efficiently. Um, Something I want to share just that's been on my mind, particularly during my stint here at the Field Foundation, because I think this would be relevant to the consultants on this call. You know, as a foundation leader, have been very focused on the question, like, how do we position ourselves to be a more valuable strategic partner to the grantees in our portfolio? And so with that sort of question in mind, we are being much more intentional about asking our grantee partners, like what they need. And in addition to the grant making that we provide, find ways to connect them to the expertise that they need, particularly in the form of consultants. And actually, the next step is actually finding ways to pay for it so that the nonprofit partners that we fund aren't having to stretch their grant dollars so thin. I'll give you a quick example. We're making a pretty significant investment in a group that's based in Inglewood. And we were out on a site visit, visiting them, and we just noticed that they had some IT challenges. And this was a group, community organizing group in Inglewood that never truly had the capacity to have a professional IT firm come in and set up their systems. And so we immediately, upon learning of this challenge, um, extended our contract with our, expanded our contract with our IT provider so that they could actually serve this grantee partner. So again, the cost didn't hit the nonprofit, it hit our balance sheet, but we were able to like very quickly connect them to the network of consultants that we knew could deliver on the challenges that they had. Again, as we move forward, I'm looking to do that more, particularly as we narrow our portfolio and develop deep relationships. Really, again, position ourselves as the partner that our grantees come to first when they have challenges, and be the matchmaker when necessary, and of course, the underwriter when necessary. So hopefully at a high level, that helps you all understand at least how I approach engaging consultants. Hire for expertise, deep relationships, keep them close throughout your journey.
No, thank you. And that's the very valuable perspective that I knew that you would be able to bring. And I think, Susie, we've provided a lot of different perspectives, and I hope provided a lot of potential questions, both from you and from our attendees today.
Can can I just make a comment? Daniel, what you said really resonated. I mean, that's like the ideal client that wants the deep, trusting relationship. And I will say that that to me is the part of being a consultant that is so extraordinary is the trust and in many cases, the intimacy that you develop with a client. And it's fantastic. And so I really appreciate that you have that approach, that you've had that experience, and that you're sharing it with the Field Foundation's grantees, because I think it can change the landscape in a lot of ways for the relationship between nonprofits and consultants. So thank you.
Indeed.
Thanks, Amy. And Daniel, I'd like to pitch my first question to you because I would say, over the years working with so many nonprofits across the state, I not infrequently hear that organizations are a little bit afraid to ask their foundation partners for support to specifically hire consultants. I'm curious if you've heard similar things from grantees or how you would encourage grantees to start that conversation with their funders.
Susie, that's a great question. And first of all, as a person who worked in the sector many years before joining philanthropy, I had that fear too. The power dynamics historically between foundations and 501(c)(3s, it's been challenging. You always want to look like you had everything together and that you don't have any needs, so that you can, get the grant renewed and maintain a high level of confidence. The reality, though, is that us in philanthropy have to take on the responsibility of um, dismantling that power dynamic. And what I mean by that is, to be clear, I want to acknowledge that because we are stewards of capital, there's always a dynamic there because we control the flow of capital. But what I'm trying to do at the Field Foundation is sort of reposition how we think about that role. Right? So, um, and I'll try to keep this anecdote tight. When I joined the Field Foundation, I spent some time with actually a consultant at the time, Mei Hong, who was working for Rockefeller Advisors, and she came into the foundation to help us think through what type of foundation we wanted to be. And there's a lot of research on the seven archetypes of philanthropy, and I won't bore you with all the details. But we went through this process again with a consultant, and my staff and the board landed on this idea that we wanted to be seen as an investor and organizer of capital. So I wanted our grantee partners to see us as someone who's investing in them and wanted to be in a long-term relationship with them. Um, I came to that conclusion because I was actually the week before I started my role, and today's my 4-year anniversary for being in this role. But my just right before taking on this role at the Field Foundation, I visited a friend of mine who I went to University of Chicago with, who works in private equity. And I just shadowed him around because I wanted to see how, that type of organizer of capital connected and engaged their investees. And I was blown away by the fact that these, again, private equity folks were in deep partnership with the companies that they supported. They sat on their boards, they were on advisory councils, CEOs, whenever it's a headwind that they had to navigate, they're calling, you know, an investor. If there was a tailwind that they wanted to fully leverage, they called the investor. And I asked the question, I said, well, how come in philanthropy we have just the opposite type of relationship? One of the folks we funded here at Field, I met with is the HANA Center. I remember their former ED saying to me, Daniel, if you really want to be a partner, we have to be able to trust that if the boiler breaks at my organization, I can call you and not be embarrassed that the boiler is not working, but can share that with you and get the $5,000 we need to fix it. Most people in philanthropy don't position themselves as a person who wants to receive that call. So going back to our journey at Field, we committed ourselves to actually saying we want to be more like the private equity folks and be in deep relationship. And that requires vulnerability, it requires an intentionality around building trust. It means, to use the example that I used a few moments ago, when you notice something, be the one that actually says, "Oh, I see that you're having the challenges. Is there anything I can do to help?" Right? When I did that with the group that we're funding in Inglewood, and I don't want to mention all the groups because I don't want to put all their business in the street. Um, they welcomed it because they was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, we've had this problem. We really don't have a IT system. We don't have a security system. We worry about it." And then I said, "Okay, look, I know somebody who can help, and not only do the matchmaking, but I actually said, okay, don't worry about it. We already have a contract. We can at least get you started so that you can be in a position to budget for it in your next budget year because it was unexpected expense." But again, the point I'm trying to make clear is the power dynamic in philanthropy is real. It's our responsibility, again, to reimagine what that relationship looks like and distribute power more evenly between funder and grantee. And um, take the first step at inviting the partner into a conversation that will reveal a need. Um, and last point I'll make, um, and this is related to like sitting on boards. When I joined philanthropy, when I joined the Chicago Community Trust, it's going back about 14 years ago now, I was told that I had to step away from all my nonprofit boards. Um, the good news is that I pushed back because at the time when I joined the trust, I was not on the grant making side of the business. I was the chief marketing officer. And so I said to Terry Mazzani, then CEO of the trust, I said, well, I'm not doing grant making. I don't think that rule should apply to me because I'm not making grant decisions. But it was a practice that was common in philanthropy that if you work at a foundation and you're most certainly engaged in grant making, you shouldn't sit on boards, particularly of boards that you potentially organizations that you could potentially fund. When I joined Field again 4 years ago, I had a conversation with the board before I took the job, and I made it clear that I wanted to maintain my relationship with the nonprofits that I'm engaged in, particularly at the board level. And because the rule was, you have to step down. And I said, well, I'm now in a position to better support them than ever. So like I'm ascending to a role at a foundation. And why would I choose that moment to disengage from folks, from organizations that I really believe in and I really believe do vital work here in the city? And so I was able to, excuse me, to allow my board to give me permissions to stay plugged in at the board level for a handful of nonprofits because um, I wanted to use my positionality in the sector to actually, um, quite frankly, benefit these groups that I care about. Big picture, I'm hoping that that practice or that orthodoxy that you see in philanthropy changes because, again, going back to the private equity example, if you're really investing in a business that you believe in or an organization that you trust and believe in, and you want to see that mission come to life, then we should be as deeply engaged as possible, right? And there's no better way to sort of understand the needs of an organization than to be close. And of course, the board level is probably the closest you can get. Now, and again, a foundation leader can't sit on every board of the group that every group that they fund. But what I am encouraging with my team is to have a handful in their portfolio where they're plugged in like that, because I want to use, particularly at a smaller foundation, our model. I want to like test our model, improve our model, and ultimately encourage other foundations, particularly larger ones, to mimic it. Oh,
Thank you so much for that. And I'm so glad you brought up May. She works with me and with Forefront to organize the Grantmakers Institute, and I know you sat in on one of our panels for that as well. And one of the conversations that has come up each of the last few years at the Grantmakers Institute and also in some of the United Philanthropy Forum conversations I've been lucky to be part of, is that like commitment beyond the checkbook that you mentioned. And I'm really excited about the energy behind that because I think, as you said, like if we are really in this to advance the missions of the work in the city, the stronger the partnerships we have, the better for all of us.
and
So yeah, thank you so much for that. I want to shift a little bit toward not fully into nuts and bolts, but for Tweed and Amy, you have probably worked with organizations in all sorts of different development stages. And what for each of you, and Amy, let's start with you, would you say is the best time to bring in a consultant?
So that's actually that's a good question. It's I think that there's not one best time. Organizations, I believe, need different things at different times during their life cycles. And so one of the things actually that can often be kind of a a difference that people don't totally understand and that is really important. And this often happens early on with organizations, for instance, when they're staffing up, is that they don't necessarily understand the difference between hiring a consultant and hiring a contractor. A contractor who comes in and fulfills a staff role, as opposed to a consultant who comes in many ways to facilitate some kind of change or growth. I do strategic planning, executive leadership, transition management and advising, board development and governance. And I will just say that there's a whole lot of governance going on right now. One of my things of the moment is that given what's going on in the world right now, this is not a time that nonprofits can succeed with boards who phone it in. The real life of what is going on for nonprofits need boards that are really committed and really engaged. So it's different and the needs are different, but it depends on what the project is. I mean, I think Daniel's point about somebody to come in and do IT, there are just different needs at different times. I know for me, I started consulting having come from doing executive search because I feel that and don't get me wrong, program is essential and I love programs, but there are a lot of people out there who want to work in programs because that's where the rubber hits the road for nonprofits. I really love the infrastructure stuff because my feeling is you can't stand up, if you don't have a strong backbone. And to me, the infrastructure stuff around planning and setting, understanding how to make decisions and good decisions and having an actionable strategic plan. Those are things that happen for organizations and needs at different times. And having done more than one strategic plan, for instance, for clients, you can see the amazing opportunities of doing the second plan, on the back of the success of the first plan. And so readiness, I think it's a readiness issue depending on what the need is. And that I think is why it's really great when nonprofits reach out to consultants and say, and frankly, I've been found on the ACN website. We have a great directory, shameless plug. Go to the directory. You can do a couple of things. You can submit an RFP and people will respond, or you can go to the directory and read through the profiles and say, that looks like somebody who might be able to help me, and pick up the phone or send an email and have a conversation. We do very well in developing a relationship and developing a client consultant partnership when we both understand the need and we work on figuring out what the solution might be together. And so, just submitting a proposal, that's kind of a beginning, but it should be a kickoff point for a conversation about how we can work together.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit like the adage about planting a tree. The best time to have planted a tree is a while ago. The second best time is right now. So definitely, we've talked. Amy's talked a little bit about this. Daniel's talked a little bit about this, about having those partnerships and the importance of relationships. Reach out. I would say best time that I like to be reached out to is to start conversations, because if I can, I'm always happy to have a brief conversation, either virtual or over coffee, just to get a sense of what your organization is going through. What is your vision for the organization? What are some of the ways that you hope the organization can succeed? Even having that idea can then help to inspire ideas later on. There's consultants that I talk to all the time. They'll notice a new development taking place in the news. Maybe there's a new grant opportunity that they've seen or that they've been able to implement for another organization. Well, all of a sudden it pops into their mind a conversation that they had with another nonprofit leader a while ago. They're like, you should be looking at this opportunity as well. So if you keep the relationships going on, those, I mean, that's the best way that I found it taking place.
Hey, Tweet, Susie, if it's okay, I just want to build on Tweet's point. I and Amy's point. First of all, I wanted to just double underscore the distinction between a contractor consultant. It's really important. Um, what I have found most useful is engaging consultants that I know have the background and expertise that I need access to. I like to engage them in retainer relationships. So, like here at the Field Foundation, we have a program evaluator strategist, like a PhD, who has expertise in program evaluation. She's on a retainer because I like being able to call people up and think out loud. So oftentimes, like I very rarely write a scope of work or RFP like for a consultant services. I have that consultant that I know, and we've had some continuity. We've been able to build trust over time, and oftentimes, to Tweet's point, the conversation leads to the type of discovery that we need to then, develop a scope. But I, as a leader, prioritize the retainer because A, I want to respect people's time. And two, I want to have access to their brain whenever I need it. And it's often that access helps me figure out, what I need. So from my executive coach to my program design and evaluation person to um, public relations and marketing, I, all of those engagements are retainer type of engagements. And I encourage other leaders, be it of a nonprofit or a foundation, and again, I understand the capacities differ depending on size to develop that type of network. It's like having your kitchen cabinet. And again, last point I would make, going back to when I worked for the Schreiber Center and WBZ, I didn't have the same type of financial capacity I have now at Field, so the network may have been um, smaller, but I advocated year over year in budget time to just like, even if it was nominal, to like say like let's just keep that retainer, even if it's 2,000 a month or 5,000 a quarter, just so I can actually have quick access. And most times when I was um, a senior level executive, I was able to sell that to my CEO or executive director.
That sort of hits on something too. For instance, I love retainers because I love being accessible to my clients, and I always bill with a project fee, not by the hour, because I don't want my clients ever to feel that they can't call me or email me or ask me anything because they're going to start the meter ticking. And so I think that that's part of that kind of nuts and bolts kind of thing goes into how you really develop a strong, trusting relationship, client and consultant. And the availability and being the trusted advisor is really important in the relationship and can really have great value for the nonprofits.
Thank you, Amy and Daniel. I so appreciate you bringing up that just the idea of retainers for consultants. That's not very common. And I think a lot of folks may not know that that's even an option. So I really appreciate that. For projects um, that are not a retainer, that are a one-time project, I'm curious, both from Amy and Tweed, from your experience as actually being the person helping to execute the project, and also Daniel, from your perspective of funding a project, from your various roles, what is the ideal runway to getting started? So from the time that the nonprofit says, "Oh, we want to do this," to, day one of work. And I'm sure with different scopes, that's going to be different. But if you can sort of give folks just a general concept.
Yeah, I think it's definitely different scopes. It depends on the type of project. I'd say a sweet spot is somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, if you're thinking about too far out, I mean, sometimes the project can rapidly change, even in that 6 to 8 weeks project, or as a timeline. The world can rapidly change these days in 6 to 8 weeks. So I would say I think what you might be asking too is like what is the ideal time for from from the contract signing to project start. And again, yeah, like I'd say, somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks so that the consultant can prepare. But I wouldn't defer someone, or I wouldn't tell someone not to set up something just because it's not in that sweet spot. I've started things because I had a conversation with someone on a Wednesday and then started on Thursday. I have also had talked to people, and we've been aligned on doing something, but the project itself won't start for another 4 or 5 months. So it happens, but 6 to 8 weeks is my preference.
I think that's a really nuanced question, and it does depend on the project. I mean, I kind of joke that I'm still waiting to hear back from some people from about 5 years ago. They never returned my phone calls to find out what the status of something was, and they never returned my emails, and I guess they decided to do something else. Or I'll get an email from someone, we're having a board retreat in 3 weeks. Would you be able to facilitate? And that to me, frankly, if I'm available, I might be able to, but there is the missing piece of the fact that a consultant doesn't just wake up a Wednesday morning or a Saturday morning and walk into a room and facilitate a retreat. And so there's this need for the upfront work of alignment on what the project is, what the goals are, building the relationship and all of that. And so it depends. I'm thinking of clients I've worked with over the years where we've talked about something, and then, I mean, I'm actually working on a very large project now. We started talking about it in last March, and they needed then to get funding. And we kept in contact, and the project started in October and will run through November. So it depends. But there was also trust built up kind of immediately. So I knew that, yeah, and I knew that, they were gonna get this funding. And because one of the things for consultants that I think is a fair thing to put out there is that it can be feast or famine. And so there's an ebb and flow to being a consultant. And so sometimes we have a lot of work and sometimes we have less work. And so it's kind of hard to know. And it can be difficult when people say, yeah, we'd really like to get this project started. And then you don't, and then there's kind of a silent period. And everything I've learned kind of over the years has come out of an experience. I now, for instance, put in my contracts for particular kinds of projects that the contracts need to be signed off by the CEO or executive director and the board chair. That is because I had a meeting with a board chair once who looked at me and said, "What's this project? Why are we doing it? Who are you?" And I thought, we need buy-in. And so again, organizations need to figure out their buy-in and their time frame and what they need, and then and then we all need to work on that together.
One thing I will add, first of all, I respect the wisdom of consultants. So, like, if we agree on a particular output or outcome that we're aiming for, I will ask very directly, like, what do we need? What needs to, how much time do you need? What what do you need from me to make that timeline work? Um, and so, having continuity in terms of relationships and a high level of trust, at least at this stage of my career, it's easy for me to have that type of conversation with a consultant. Um, but I didn't always think that way. And I think when I was early in my career, I I was I learned from consultants, right? I learned how not to ask for the impossible and instead negotiate terms that work for everybody. The last point I want to make with respect to this question, I, I I I do spend a lot of time asking consultants like, what do you need from me? Like, what does the institution need to have in place in order for you to successfully complete the project? And usually, it's like, okay, who are the decision makers making that explicit? Who's the owner, like on staff? Um, what the cadence of communication should look like so that, no one's going dark or no one's ghosting anyone. Like, asking those really basic questions. I learned to ask those questions from consultants who asked them of me, right? As I moved again through my career. And I remember that because I've had a couple tough situations early in my career where we didn't hit deadlines. Um, and when you sort of debrief it and again, if you have a good relationship, people will tell you, well, we didn't meet it because you didn't do this. And usually there's, a little bit on both sides, but you got to have those have that type of explicit conversation at the front end in order to figure out like what the runway should look like to launch a project and then what the flight path will look like once the project is launched.
I would say too that, just like any interview process for a job is a two-way street, that that not only is the candidate being interviewed by the prospective employer, but the candidate is also kind of interviewing the prospective employer. Is this a place where I could work? Do the values align with my values? That's the same thing with consultants. We are we are evaluating whether a client would be what I refer to as a select client. And there are certain things that matter for me, which is there reliable communication? Are you ghosting me or not ghosting me? Are you responding when you say you will? Things like that that tell me that this is going to be an engagement where we can both be successful, where the project outcomes are going to be what the client envisions and what I can provide, and that we're going to enjoy working with each other. I mean, I think that's just so essential. I once said to a group, I was the third person that they interviewed at like 9:30 at night. And I thought, like, these guys like really don't want to talk to me. They're done tonight. And so I said, I would love to do this project with you and a few other things. And I answered their questions and said, but I really hope is that you find the person that you want to spend time with and who you will have some fun with.
That's excellent wisdom. I think that having that personal fit is something I think I didn't really realize how important was for a long time in my career. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I want to let our participants know I have a couple more questions for our panelists. We are going to open it up to our participants to ask questions. You can either put them in the chat or we'll have time to come off mute. We will stop the recording at that point so that folks, if you have questions that maybe you don't want recorded to be shared with other folks so that you can be candid. And that will be in just a couple of minutes. So get your questions ready. But before we transition, I wanted, another question for participants. I'm really curious, sort of the level of experience with consultants of the folks that are in the room today. So if you could pop into the chat, if you have done a number of projects with consultants, if you are brand new to this work, just so we can get sort of a sense of who's in the room with us today. And that being said, Amy and Tweed, I was wondering if you could talk about how folks think about starting to create a scope and a budget and expectations for a project.
That's always hard. I think sometimes with a budget, you have to think about what it is you want. I mean, in a sense, your wish list for the project. And then, frankly, have a conversation with a consultant. I mean, just going to put it out there. You can't do a strategic planning project for $5,000 that has any meaning, that has any desired outcome for your organization. So like we're just going to put that out there. And so talking to consultants, if it's the first time you've ever done strategic planning, talk to the person you think you want to work with and, say, this is what I want. This is how many people I want to engage externally and internally to listen and engage with and help us chart our future. What might that cost? Because otherwise we're all kind of wasting our time when we talk about something and we scope it out and we get to the point and we find out the budget, is $5,000 and like, wow. So it's again, and this is what Daniel talked about, is just build the relationship. I mean, you can do great things when you scope it out together as opposed to nonprofits scoping it out. Because I've seen, I've had conversations with people where they like have their whole plan. They know exactly what they want to do. And frankly, then they're just giving the consultant a to-do list, which is in a sense not getting the most out of the consultant, who has consultants bring every next, like the next project benefits from all the projects up until then. And so every next project has that much behind it in a sense that the consultant can bring. And so engage, just like let's talk. We don't bite.
Yeah, I would say, there's no lack of resources to find out what a good scope looks like, especially in this day and age with LLMs. LLMs do hallucinate, so, don't take them for word by any means. But that is an additional resource to take something through. I would say, especially because LLMs have no idea about, or they don't focus on geographic area. They don't focus on many things. So it's a decent start. Although you do have to worry about some privacy concerns and a whole host of other issues. That said, I first and foremost would look to peers in your across the sector. If
Mhm.
you're a chief marketing officer, talk to other marketing people in nonprofits. Ask them if, to get their thoughts. Definitely reach out to consultants. Reach out to us. If you are unsure of budget, I frequently will ask people, what is your budget? If they can't give me an answer, that gives me an idea that, what stage they're at in finding out,
Right.
um, you know, uh, what's the political will inside the organization to get the project done. And so yeah, I mean, there's plenty of different resources. Definitely reach out to the consultant because also I will ask sometime, what is your budget? And they will give me a range that because I do like the person and because I want to work with them, I might be willing to give a you're a very good collaborator discount. Yeah, that's my thoughts there.
Well, and in fact, Tweet, that's a really good point because the other thing is if we know your budget, we then also can tailor what we can do.
Yes,
So, for
yeah.
instance, I actually submitted a proposal to a prospective client. I'd worked with them on something else, and they had X amount to do strategic planning. And so they wanted to spend $10,000. And I said, this is what I can do for 10. This is what I could do for 15. This is what I could do for 20. And because I felt that it was also partly educating them to what really goes into doing that. And
And
so by helping them understand like, what you can get for what.
And then you probably or potentially push the issue to higher leadership, either the executive director or the board, and being like,
Yeah.
okay, well, you approved 10,000. Here's what they said, and all of a sudden the board might find, oh, we do want to do this for 20,000. We will either find the resources
Right.
somewhere or dig into our pockets. So
Right. They actually had a board member lead the process.
there you go. Yeah.
Thank
One thing,
you.
if I may add one point, I think as a now veteran of the nonprofit sector, um, I think we have to do nonprofit leaders need to do a better job at budgeting and doing budget planning. So like mistakes that I made early in my career was just throwing a number into the budget and not really validating that number, like whether be it strategic planning, be it we got to build a new website, be it we need a new brand system. And what I learned, and I learned this through trial and error, is to spend much more time during my budget planning season engaging prospective consultants and doing the hard work then similar to what Amy just said of like understanding like if I have $50,000 and we want to do X, am I going to be able to achieve it? And again, over time, you have enough relationships where it's easier to do that. But I spend a lot of time, even with the Field Foundation, the budget planning season is an important time of year. And so if we have a strategy in place and we have an idea what our operating plan for the year is going to be, I encourage everyone and demand actually everybody on my team, you know, put realistic numbers in the budget, right? Um, and again, we're not in a situation where we're necessarily fundraising the way I used to, but we still need to have a good idea of what if we want to do X, what is X going to cost? So, and I think again, nonprofit leaders are stretched so thin that sometimes they just don't have enough time and enough staff to do that type of work. So now, as a board member, that's where I feel that of many nonprofits, we can add value as like being that partner to the executive director to help them take a more sophisticated approach to budget planning.
Well, and nonprofits get what they pay for. And there are certain things um, that I'm trying to think how to describe it. I mean, the analogy is that years ago we were rehabbing, well, we were redoing our kitchen, and my brother said wisely, it costs the same amount to install cheap tile as it does to install more expensive, better quality tile. And that's one of those things that you're never going to tear out and redo. You might change a faucet, but you're not going to tear out the backsplash and change the backsplash. And so there's certain things that you sort of should pay. You should pay what it really costs up front to get it done right because it really will support and enhance your organization.
Thank you. I wanted to lift up a question that came in the chat. Someone is asking if we could clarify again the difference of the duties and responsibilities of a consultant versus a contractor. And maybe if you can share kind of a concrete example, that might be really helpful.
Well, so I had an experience where I was brought into an organization to consult on a particular project around leadership development within their team. And then while I was there, they started inviting me to different meetings and kind of changing what we were doing based on what was going on organization wide. And could you do this and fill in this role? And that was really kind of a staff role that they didn't have. And at one point, at a point, I finally actually had to say, I think we need to talk about this because I felt like they were using me not as a consultant to bring my expertise to help them be able to build capacity within the organization. They really wanted me to do some tasks that really should have belonged to a staff person. And so that's kind of for me how I distinguish it. And contractors can be brought in for a long time and can, to in fact, there may be money for external stuff like that where you bring in a contractor because there isn't a staff position. And so that's kind of how I see it. And that's a not particularly articulate description to say.
No, I think that hits it on it really well, and I will point out though that especially as ACN for the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits, we do have members that do both. Like for example, we have interim leaders, people that are professional interim executive directors. So if you need someone to come in for a not a part-time basis, but a select period of time, there are people who will do that and perform the duties of the regular executive director. Now, many interim executive directors will also want to apply that consulting background that they have, and because there is a different lens that a interim can provide. I'm coming in here for 3, 4 months, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. While I'm here, I'm also going to provide consulting expertise on the things that I think need changing on as I, roll off of the organization. So I think sometimes the term consultant versus contractor can be for some consultants there's a stricter line than
Mhm.
others, and I will leave it at that.
Right. I think that's a particularly good example, Tweed. I mean, because when I have brought in and helped my clients find interim executive directors several times during executive leadership transition projects, and yes, it is fulfilling both roles in ways that are extremely meaningful to the organization.
Thank you for that. All right, my last question is about one of the most common requests we have to introduce folks to a consultant, and that is around grant writing. I'm not sure that this is exactly in your particular priority areas, but I'd love any thoughts from your own experience or from colleagues that you can share, just because that is such an incredibly common question. So kind of two parts. One, um, folks asking if they should hire a consultant for just for writing grants. And also, we often get a question which I know the answer to, but I would love to hear your description of it for how do we decide how much to pay a grant writing consultant?
So, yeah, let me say first, Susie, as we think about the evolution of the Ask a Consultant series, I think we may have hit on our next topic
Mhm.
because I am not a grant writer. Amy is not a grant writer.
Yeah.
There are many ACN members who are grant writers. And so I would say my short answer to the question is yes, you should definitely consider hiring a grant writer. I have seen many successful collaborations, partnerships, where if the organization had not reached out to a grant writer, they would have not secured the grant, and that the grant writer can often consult on areas, on particular organizations' opportunities for the nonprofit to pursue. So that's the short answer to yes. And then I'm sorry, there was a second question in there. Yes?
You're on mute, Susie.
Thank you. I was just thinking, yes, there was a second part, and now it's
It,
slipping my mind.
it was the fee part.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. Yeah, I frequently get the question, folks are like, oh, should we give them a percentage of what they raise? That is absolutely not the right thing. But from your all's experience, again, your colleagues, like what is the best practice for setting that up?
So I will say my closest friend who I met right after we both joined ACN, shameless plug for Joyce Poll, Poll, JG Poll and Associates. She's been writing some great stuff on LinkedIn about grant writing and what's going on in the world right now. I have learned a great deal from her. So yes, hiring an external grant writer can be a game changer for a nonprofit. And it needs to be somebody that you bring in and you really partner with, and that you respect, in a sense, for the strategic approach that they can bring and the understanding, and that the organization needs to support that person. Like, you have to really provide the documentation they need before the deadline, that kind of thing. And in terms of fee structure, from what I understand, there's a lot of trying to lowball, frankly, fees for grant writers. And that's just not, it's inappropriate. Um, and And something not getting funded is not necessarily the grant writer's fault. It's they're the vagaries of things getting funded and all of that. Um, but I think it would be a great program to have. I frankly think you should have Joyce as part of the panel. Um, and it, it has to be paid for outside of the money raised and all of that. This is a cost that an organization needs to absorb. And I think that, this goes to Daniel's point about accurate and honest budgeting within an organization. You have to be able to afford what you need or figure out how to afford what you need. And frankly, not off the backs of your consultants.
Thank you for that. Daniel, I saw you come off mute. Do you have thoughts you want to share?
Well, I want to share this. I was I had dinner with a group of foundation leaders recently, and one foundation leader shared with me that upon issuing an RFP, they received lots of responses, and they were reading the proposals, and they decided it felt like, you know, a lot of AI had been used to produce a lot of the proposals. And so the foundation leader said that a member of her team just took a couple of samples and they actually created a prompt for a few of the applicants and ran it through AI and essentially generated nearly an identical proposal through AI. Now, just to be clear, this foundation is not going to penalize folks for using AI, but they wanted to validate like how much AI has been used to produce the grant proposals. I walked away from that conversation just thinking, it's been on my mind since I had this conversation, like, "Ooh, you know, yeah, AI is such a powerful tool and it can help you produce a lot, but there is still a role for expertise that consultants bring." And I think, and this is just a wondering that I've been having since that conversation. Like, I think there had grant writing consultants, have to reposition themselves as not just the producers of the content, but you know, even as someone who can actually coach an organization on how to effectively use those tools, but still maintain a unique identity and voice that, quite frankly, will make you more competitive in a process like that. Um, Again, I haven't written about this or spoken previously about it, but given that you brought up the role of grant writers, I thought it would be important to share it here because I'm sure there's some folks on this call that provide this service to nonprofits. And so again, I'm not anti-AI, but I think the consultants themselves need to demonstrate that their wisdom still has value, and that value is going to manifest through helping folks understand how to appropriately use AI without losing your sense of identity.
Yeah, I actually think grant writers are more important than ever for that reason. I have that we're in a real Wild West moment when it comes to grant writing and for foundations in general. I've heard anecdotes of situations where some foundations or just the grant writers, sorry, the funders are throwing out AI applications despite the fact that they didn't say anything about if you use AI, you will be penalized. And also in a situation where you do have AI and anyone can create a what looks to be a great grant proposal, it becomes like in the movie Incredibles, where you have the superhero who has put out all of these products, and anyone can be a superhero. And when that happens, no one is a superhero except for those that actually, are able to navigate the system and also up to speed with these trends. They might even know, okay, this particular foundation has been throwing out, anything that looks AI. even though they're not disclosing it. So from my perspective, grant writers, and especially those with a consulting background, have never been even more important.
Yeah.
I was just pulling up. I'm going to post a link in the chat to the Philanthropy Club conversation on AI in fundraising if folks want to hear more on that. But at this point, I would like to open questions up to our participants on the call. So if you'd like to type it into the chat or take yourself off mute, you're welcome to bring your own questions. And Emily, if you could stop the recording now, please.